Welcome to another masterclass. Today we're going to learn how to photograph the Milky Way using a star tracker with Mr. Dan Zafra.
Hi, PhotoPillers. How are you? I'm very happy to be here. So thanks, Rafa and the PhotoPills team for having me. And yeah, I hope that we enjoy today a great masterclass on Milky Way tracking. And yeah, very excited. And yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dan, for being here. It's a long time we're super interested in the PhotoPills community and learning on how to shoot the stars on the Milky Way using these machines, the star trackers, and you're a real expert. So, man, I can't wait for hear what you have to say and teach us today. But before we start, for people that don't know who Dan Zafra is, can you tell a bit about you?
Yep.
Yourself?
So my name is Dan Zafra. I'm a professional landscape astrophotographer. I'm original from Spain, from Madrid. That's why you see this accent. And this webinar is going to have a bit of a Spanish accent with Rafa and I here. And yeah, I'm basically living now out of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. Yeah, what I do is mostly doing landscape and astrophotography. I'm sharing this with others, and something that I've been doing lately, especially the last couple of years, is mostly Milky Way tracking, and that's what I'm gonna show you today. Yeah, so whenever you're ready, I can get started.
Yeah, let's get started. And I think that your English is much better than mine.
So I'm gonna start sharing my screen, and just 1 second. Yeah, so let me know now when you can see my screen.
Yes, already there.
Yeah, so can you see everything fine now?
Yeah, here we go.
All right, so well, first, before getting started, you don't have to take any notes of this. I'm gonna leave a link to all the slides of this presentation. So there's a PDF with all the information that Rafa is gonna link in the YouTube description or in the YouTube comments. So feel free to take any notes if you like, but all the slides of this presentation are gonna be available after the live stream. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. We're gonna be replying all your questions throughout the webinar. And then if you have any other questions at the end of the live stream, we can also reply to whatever questions you have about Milky Way, about tracking, or any other thing. So without further ado, let's get started. And as I said, this is gonna be a Milky Way star tracking masterclass. And this is a bit of it, or everything that we're gonna see today. We're going to start seeing why we should track, which are the benefits of using a star tracker. We'll discuss the main tracking camera gear, talking about especially about lenses, focal lengths, star trackers, which is obviously the most important thing here. And then we'll dive into the step-by-step setup. So I'm going to show you how to use a star tracker depending on your tracking model. And I'm going to show you all the steps so you can easily take your images. After this, we'll dive into track camera settings, which is also one of the most important things. When you're tracking, the camera settings are going to be completely different compared to shooting the Milky Way from a fixed tripod. So here I will explain to you a few basics and some references so you can set your settings in your camera. And lastly, we'll dive into the post-processing. This is also one of the most important things. And I will show you 2 complete examples from the planning using PhotoPills, and then diving into all the steps that I usually follow when I'm tracking. We'll discuss how to do a blending, and I'm going to show you an entire PSV with all the layers so you can see how is my process. Lastly, I will show you capture the Milky Way, which is a project I've been involved in the last year, and you might find it interesting, but we'll see that at the end. So first of all, as I was saying, well, this is a bit of a presentation again, but my name is Dan Zafra, and one of the things I love doing is traveling and photography. Those are my main 2 passions, and especially traveling for shooting nightscapes and Milky Way. I love traveling to those places where you can find those are really dark skies, especially like in the U.S. Southwest, like Utah, Arizona, California, and all those landscapes. Shooting the Milky Way is my passion. There's something special about being with the stars. Along with this, my other big passion is sharing and teaching others, and that's what I do through my website. I'm the co-founder of Capture the Atlas, and this is a travel and photography website where I teach others and help others with their photography. So we have photography guides, articles, tutorials, We have inspirational articles like the Milky Way Photography of the Year. This is a yearly list that we run with the best Milky Way images, and it's usually featured by National Geographic, Forbes, BBC, and other media. I also combine this teaching online with teaching in the field. So I also run workshops and photo tours for novel lights in places like Iceland, Norway, also local tours here in the United States, in the West. And also I run like an online academy for doing courses like Milky Way courses and other things. So that's basically my background. And yeah, now before diving into the tracking, I want to show you how I started in my Milky Way photography and how I discovered tracking. This is going to be very important just to show you why you should track and why tracking is so important. So first of all, these were my first Milky Way images. Probably this is familiar to you. That's a feeling when you take your first camera, you go out to shoot the Milky Way, you are in the night, you see the Milky Way with the naked eye, and you are amazed when you see the Milky Way in your camera screen. It's an incredible experience, but then with time you notice like, wow, my images are pretty terrible. And as you can see here, these images are really terrible. They have a lot of noise, they don't have any details, the colors are completely off, so they are terrible images. So when I was taking my first images and I saw other images online, I looked into how can I improve my Milky Way images? And what I checked was like, okay, you should get a full frame camera and a wide angle fast lens. And that's what I did. I got my first Nikon D800 and then the 1424 2.8, which was a fantastic lens. And with that, I noticed like a great improvement and advancement in my Milky Way images. So especially in terms of noise, using this full frame camera, there was much more detail, there were better colors, and my images were much better. However, I was feeling that my images were still lacking something. I didn't know why, but there was still lacking something. I was seeing other images taken by professional astrophotographers with those incredible colors in the Milky Way, those nebulae, those details. And I started looking into how I could take my Milky Way images one step ahead. That's when I discovered tracking. This was a couple of years ago. And when I started tracking. And yeah, it was like a huge change in my photography. It was a game changer and a completely revolution in the way I shoot and in the way I understand this Milky Way photography. So when I started tracking, I started seeing much more details in the Milky Way. So now I could, when I was processing my images, I could extract all these details, all these nebulae, all these colors. It was like a big difference. There were some things that I couldn't capture before, like the air glow. The air glow is all these colors that you can see in this image in the background, like those green and yellowish colors. So basically, before I couldn't capture any of this air glow, and doing this Milky Way tracking, I was able to capture all those colors. Also capturing the Milky Way at longer focal lengths, like in this example, I shot the sky and the foreground at 50 millimeters. That was previously impossible because the shutter speed was very short. So now I was able to capture longer exposures with longer focal lengths like this. And that will enable me to capture the Milky Way with a different perspective. So I kept like shooting, tracking different trackers. I started trying different things. And soon I was becoming more happy with my Milky Way images, and I just kept tracking, shooting the Milky Way in different places with different conditions, and just practicing, trying, and keep improving. So as I said, this was like a real change in my Milky Way photography, and that's why today I want to show you which are the benefits of using a star tracker. Most people find that trackers are a bit daunting, that maybe it is something for astrophotographers, that you need to have like some scientific knowledge. But far from reality, trackers are very user-friendly today. So there are many straightforward and simple trackers that you can use for any simple Milky Way photography. It doesn't matter how long have you been shooting the Milky Way. Even if you've been if you're a beginner, if you've been shooting for a short time, you can use a tracker. And I'm gonna show you today everything and why you should start tracking.
Cool, beautiful images, Dan. What do you have any favorite area in the Milky Way, or
any what? Sorry.
Any favorite area in the Milky Way or part of the Milky Way that you like to really track?
I usually like, of course, the Milky Way core. Everyone loves the Milky Way core. I think is the most spectacular area. But Lately, I've been doing more Milky Way panoramas, especially track panoramas. It's a bit more complex. It's one of the most difficult things technically when you're shooting the Milky Way. But I think it's impressive when you can shoot something like this with the whole Milky Way arch, where you can see not only the core, but you can see also like the Cygnus region with the North American Nebula, all this area, Cassiopeia, like different regions of the Milky Way. That's also that's very impressive. And also I've been diving into doing something with the winter Milky Way, where you can capture the Orion Nebula, and that's also great when you're tracking because you can extract more colors in the Orion Nebula. So Milky Way, we're mostly shoot the Milky Way core, but just bear in mind that you can shoot the Milky Way throughout the year. It's always spectacular, and I always recommend to do it.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned winter Milky Way, because Antonio Claret, the photographer in the PhotoPills team, took a great panorama of the Milky Way in winter. So guys, don't be afraid of shooting the Milky Way in winter. It's amazing too.
Yeah, it is. Yep, so if we dive into why we should start tracking, we're going to start with the basics. So if we look into like traditional Milky Way photography, I'm 100% sure that all of you at some point have heard this. In any guide for Milky Way photography, you will hear that you should keep your lens wide open. So open your aperture to the maximum possible in your lens. Raise your ISO above, like a high ISO, maybe above 3200. Limit your shutter speed according to the 500 rule or the MPF rules. Those are probably the three most basics that you will find when you are starting in Milky Way photography. But the problem with this is that when you are using these settings, first of all, if you keep your lens wide open, you're going to find a lot of lens aberrations. So the lenses are designed physically with some specifications where they are not the best in the corners, and especially when they are wide open. So when you're shooting with your lens at the widest aperture, it doesn't matter if it's 2.8, 1.8, whatever, you're going to find that there are going to be more chromatic aberrations in the corners, more distortions, and other problems. So that's one of the main issues. The second issue, and this is one of the most important, is the ISO. So if you keep your ISO like above 3200, most of the people think that when you raise the ISO, you're going to have more noise in your images. That's something partially true if you raise your ISO above very high limits. But the biggest problems with the ISO is that you're going to lose the dynamic range. So the biggest problem with the ISO is that when you raise your ISO maybe 4000, 5000, 6400, you're going to find that your images don't have any colors in the Milky Way. The Milky Way looks like a wide strip of band with no colors at all. And that's because you are using a very high ISO. The last one is to limit your shutter speed to the 500 rule or the MPF rule. If you're shooting a Milky Way from a fixed tripod, these rules are great. I highly recommend using the MPF rule. For this, 100% always use PhotoPills. It's super great and very easy to use. You can set your camera model, you can set your aperture, your settings, and it automatically gives you the shutter speed, maybe 12, 15, 25 seconds, whatever. But if you are using a limited shutter speed like this, bear in mind that you're not gathering enough light in your camera sensor. That's going to translate into more noise and less quality. And that's the biggest problem when you are shooting a Milky Way from a fixed tripod without a tracker. So this is one of the images that we can find using like a normal fixed tripod with the just standard settings. You can see this image and say, okay, it's not too bad. It's like a cool image in the Canadian Rockies. But if you notice, and if you check this image, especially zooming in, you'll find that the stars in the corners are pretty bad. They are elongated, they have a lot of coma, they have chromatic aberrations, and they have another issues. The other thing is that the Milky Way band don't have any colors. And the Milky Way core is usually warmer. It has like a warmer colors. And as you see here, everything is kind of white, so there is no color separation. Lastly, there's a lot of noise in the sky, so I have to use like a strong noise reduction. And there's no colors in the sky. Everything is kind of bluish and with a bit of light pollution. So there is no air glow, there isn't anything. That's why the solution to all this is to use a start tracker. And this is very important. And just remind this, once you track, there is no way back. Once you start tracking, you're going to see such a huge difference in your Milky Way images that you won't be back to to normal shooting, unless there are like difficult situations. Of course, sometimes we can track. There's like a extreme wind, something like that. But in normal situations, once you start tracking, you won't stop. So talking about what is a star tracker, in case you don't know what it is very simple. It's just a device that we use with a small motor that we can use to compensate the Earth rotation. What we have to do is basically align this device with the celestial pole. It can be either the northern or the southern celestial pole, depending on your hemisphere. And once you align your tracker, your camera is going to track the stars, and your camera will be moving following the motions of the stars. So it's a very simple, very straightforward, and it's just that. Talking about the benefits of tracking, of course, the biggest benefit when you use a star tracker is that you'll be able to increase your shutter speed. This is a fundamental and is a crucial thing about tracking. When you increase the shutter speed, you'll be gathering more light in your sensor, you'll have less digital noise, and you'll be able to use better settings. That's the most important thing. You'll be able to change your settings completely. The second thing is that you'll be able to stop down the aperture. So instead of shooting wide open, like we said before, you can close the aperture maybe 1, 2 stops, and this will translate into less aberrations and better quality. Finally, the last benefit is that you'll be able to lower your ISO. And as we said before, apart from having less noise, the most important thing is that when you lower your ISO, you will increase the dynamic range drastically in your images. So this will mean that you'll have more colors, better details, and generally, again, more quality.
Yeah. Dan, in terms of shutter speed, what shutter speed do you usually use? 1 minute, 2 minutes, or more?
Yeah.
Do you have a limit? Do you have a limit on?
Yeah, the shutter speed. This is a bit tricky. It depends on a lot of circumstances, like your tracker, your camera, your lens, the conditions. We'll talk a bit more about this later on, so I'll explain to you like a guidelines. But usually, my tracking time varies between maybe 1 to 4 minutes. As I said, this depends a lot on the conditions, but minimum 1 minute, and maximum, I usually don't go over 4 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, so talking about more benefits about tracking is that one of the biggest benefits is that it's very inexpensive. So most people think that these devices are very expensive, but far from reality, they are very affordable. And nowadays you can get trackers from from maybe $200. You can start getting the first basic models, and it's gonna be especially cheaper compared to quality lenses. So for example, if you take like a very good quality lens, like for example, the Sony 1635, that's gonna be maybe $2,000. Any good quality lens is gonna be very expensive, but a tracker is gonna be anything between $200 to $400, and this is going to transform your camera gear into a super camera gear. So even if you're using a crop sensor camera with a low quality camera sensor, it doesn't matter. It's gonna be much better, and the quality is gonna be imagine it's gonna be great. It doesn't matter the lens that you're using. Using a tracker with any camera is going to transform your gear into a much better setup. That's something to consider. So now we're gonna dive into the tracking camera gear. I don't know if there are any questions so far, but if there are any questions, please, Rafa, feel free to.
Yeah, we have one about alignments. One, I suppose you're going to be covering this.
Yeah, we'll talk about the alignments later on. So if you want, we can cover that question. Sorry, we can cover that question later on.
Awesome, perfecto.
Yeah, so talking about tracking camera gear, which is one of the most frequent questions, which tracking camera gear do you need for tracking? The basics are very simple. You just need a tripod, a camera, a lens, and a tracker. You don't need anything else. There are, of course, some things to consider if you want to make the most of your tracking. So in this section, we're going to discuss the lenses, the focal lengths, and the star trackers. We're not going to talk about cameras because cameras are basically the same. They don't have any difference. Of course, full-frame cameras are going to be preferred. But talking about lenses and focal lengths, this is really interesting. So first of all, we're going to cover the different focal lengths. And this is, again, crucial. If you are tracking using a wide-angle lens, it's going to be much easier. This is going to be fundamental. And whenever you're tracking, especially you are starting out, using wide-angle lenses is going to be always easier. So wide-angle lenses, we understand something between 12 and 24 millimeters. And the other good thing about using a wide angle for Milky Way tracking is that you'll be able to use a light tracker. We'll see later the difference between light trackers and standard trackers. But with a light tracker, you can use any wide-angle lens and it's going to be fine. There are a couple of cons of using a wide-angle lens, is that there are going to be more aberrations. So always when you're using a wide-angle lens in the corners, there are going to be more coma and other problems. And also there's going to be less detail and a smaller perspective of the Milky Way. So that can be a cons. If you're using a medium focal length, anything between maybe 24 to 50 millimeters, we're going to see a bit of a change. So we're going to see more image quality and more details in our images. The other thing about using this kind of medium focal length is that we're going to see less deformations. So you check the corners and you zoom in the details in the corners, you're going to find less coma and less aberrations. One of the cons of this medium focal length is that it's going to be a bit more complex. So it doesn't mean that these are really difficult, but it's going to be like a bit more complex. The other thing is that probably you'll need like a standard tracker. So instead of using light trackers, you'll probably need like a bigger tracker. Lastly, we have telephotos. We're going to cover this in this Milky Way webinar, in this live stream, because telephotos, we're entering now into maybe deep sky astrophotography, which is like another genre in itself. Of course, it's a Milky Way photography because we are capturing sections of the Milky Way, but it's something very different. It requires different techniques, and we're not cover this. Just bear in mind that when you are using a telephoto to capture details of the Milky Way, it's going to be much, much more difficult. So you'll have to be like 100% accurate with your pro alignment. You have to use the right gear. You have to use more gear like counterweights and other things. So we're not cover this right now, but bear in mind that if you can do this with a tracker, but it's going to be a bit more difficult. Talking about another frequent questions, which is better, zoom or prime lenses for tracking? Well, you can use either. So either lenses are going to be fine. If you have any wide angle, it's going to be perfect. But in my experience and in my opinion, prime lenses are going to be better. The four main reasons for this is because they are faster. So when you are taking a lens, prime lens, usually they have like a fast aperture, like 1.8, 1.4, and it's usually easier to find these kind of fast lenses in these prime types. They're also lighter. So this is one of the main things to consider when you are tracking. The trackers have like a payload capacity, a maximum payload, and you cannot put like a very heavy camera setup in some trackers. So prime lenses are lighter, and this is going to be better when you're tracking. Your tracking is going to be more fluid, and it's going to be better. And another reason is because they are more compact. So, for example, when you are tracking, apart from the weight and your payload capacity, the weight distribution is going to be very important. So the way you position your tracker and your lens is going to be critical in order to get the best possible exposures. So for example, if you have like a very, very heavy lens, like one of these, for example, Sigma's 1424, which is like a 1 kilo or even heavier, maybe your tracker is pointing to the ground and your tracking is not going to be very fluid. So having like a very small compact prime lens is going to be better when you're tracking. And lastly, this is not a technical benefit, but it's something to consider, is that they are cheaper. So prime lenses are generally cheaper than zoom lenses. So we're going to dive now into the different types of star trackers, which is the main thing that you need for doing this type of photography. And as we said before, there are two different types of trackers. There are light trackers, like the one you can see on the left, and there are standard trackers, like the one you can see on the right. These trackers have the same function, which is taking longer exposures of the Milky Way, but there are some differences, especially the payload capacity, the functionalities, the focal lengths, and other things. We're going to dive now into seeing everything with more in depth. So we're going to start seeing the light trackers. The light trackers have like a series of benefits. They're, for example, cheaper. So the price of these trackers usually ranges between $200 to $300, more or less. They are more light and more compact, which is great when you are traveling, or if you are, for example, high in the mountains, so that's going to be great. And they're easy to use. So if you are, for example, starting out, or you don't want to get into very complex poor alignment, using one of these light trackers is going to be great because they are very simple and straightforward to use. However, there are some cons of using these trackers. The main cons is the payload capacity. In most of these trackers, the payload capacity is around 6 pounds, which is about 3 kilos. And when you're using something around that weight, this is going to cause a lot of stress to the motor, and the tracking is not going to be good. Another thing is the focal length and exposure limits. So with most of the light trackers, you will see that if you're using a longer focal length, like anything above 25, 30 millimeters, 35 millimeters, it's going to be more difficult to use the tracker. Also to capture longer exposures. You want to expose anything above 2-3 minutes with a light tracker and a simple setup, that's going to be more difficult. They're also more unstable, and this is something really to consider, because when there are windy conditions and you use this tracker, you'll see that the wind is going to cause a lot of wobbly to your setup. And lastly, the battery life. These trackers are lighter and more compact, but the battery life is usually lighter. So maybe you have a battery life around 4, 5, 6 hours, depending on the model. So that's something to consider again. If we dive into the standard trackers, with these trackers, we'll have the main benefit is that we'll have a bigger load capacity. So the payload is going to be around 11 to 12 pounds, which is about 6 to 7 kilos. And that way you can use a DSLR, you can use heavier lenses and other things. Also, you will be able to use a longer focal length and a longer exposure. So for example, with these trackers, you can use any focal length, even telephotos, like 100 millimeters, 400 millimeters, even you want to do deep astro. You can capture longer exposures, so exposures like 3, 4, even 5 minutes with no problem. They're also more stable. That doesn't mean that if there's like a string wind, there's not going to be some vibrations, but they are much more stable than the light trackers. And the battery life is longer. So the battery life with these trackers, it ranges, but it can be maybe 20, 25, 30 hours is much longer. Talking about the cons of these trackers, the main cons is that they are a bit pricier. Not much, because if you see the difference, it's not very huge. But usually these trackers ranges between $350 to $500, more or less. So it's like maybe $200 more compared to a light tracker. They're also bigger and bulkier. This is one of the main cons that people find with these trackers. So if you are hiking, if you are going to the mountains, if you are taking longer trips, these trackers are going to be a bit more heavier, and then they are more complex to use. So the pro alignment is going to be a bit more complex, not too much, but there's definitely like a bit of a learning curve, and they require a bit more practice, and just taking a bit more practice to set up. Talking now about which tracker should I get, which is the questions I see the most, like what trackers should I get? My recommendation, and this is something general, so take this with a pinch of salt. So if, for example, I recommend light trackers usually. If you have, like, for example, like a mirrorless camera, you're perfectly fine with one of these trackers. If you want like a very straightforward setup, so you don't want to get into very complex pro alignment, you want something simple, like maybe like a quick pro alignment with a laser, something like that, these trackers are great and are very beginner friendly. If you are taking long trips and hikes, as we said, I've done like long hikes with the big trackers, and it's like a real pain in the back at the next day, to be honest. So if you are taking long trips and hikes, I highly recommend to use one of these light trackers. If you are shooting with a wide angle, and that's fine for you, if you don't want to jump into longer focal lengths and a wide angle is okay, then you can use one of these light trackers. And lastly, if you don't plan to take very advanced track panoramas and mosaics, which are obviously the most difficult thing to do, you can do them. You can track panoramas with these trackers and do mosaics, but it's going to be a bit more difficult, and with the focal length, it's going to be more complex. So that's my recommendation for light trackers. On the other hand, I recommend standard trackers. In those cases, for example, if you have like a heavier camera setup, like a DSLR, you can use a DSLR with a light tracker, but I think that, with a payload, if you're around 2 to 3 kilos, maybe 5 to 6 pounds, I would recommend to get like a standard tracker. If you take short trips and short hikes, you're usually shooting from viewpoints and from areas close to your car, then that is great to have one of these trackers. If you are looking to, and this is very crucial, if you are looking for the highest quality in your Milky Way images, these trackers are going to allow you to have the biggest quality, because you'll be able to use better settings. If you want to take advanced track panoramas and mosaics, these trackers are also great, because you'll be able to capture just any Milky Way images that you want. And lastly, if you would like to try deep sky astrophotography, as we said, this is a bit more complex, it's a bit more difficult, it's another genre, but if you want to try that in the future, then you need a tracker like this. So this is basically my recommendation, but at the end, I'm going to show you now which tracker should I get. We see now the recommendations, but we're going to discuss now the main tracker camera models. If there's any question, Rafa, just feel free to shoot. And we're going to discuss now all the different models depending on the light and standard trackers.
There are a few questions on gear, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Fred, when using focal length above 100 millimeters, do you think dithering is a good point? I'm not sure what dithering is. Is DITHE or ing?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the question. I'm not really into. I have to say this. I'm not really into deep sky astro. I've dabbled in it. I've tried some. I had like a Sony 1 to 400 millimeters. I capture some details, but I'm not into doing, because when you're doing deep astro, there are some things like taking like dark frames, taking bias frames. The post processing is a bit different. I'm not really into deep sky. That's something to mention. But I'm not sure about that. But when you are shooting anything below 135 millimeters, you don't have to worry about technical complex things related to deep sky.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Fred can give us more details in the chat. Then we have Asgard. Do you use an H-alpha modified camera?
No, we're going to talk about this later on a little bit. I don't use an astro mode camera. There are some pros and cons of using an astro mode camera. We can discuss this later if you like in that section. But at this moment, I don't use any astro mode camera. And if I want to extract the H-alpha regions in the Milky Way, which are those reddish colors, I use different post-processing techniques to do it. But yeah, at this moment, I don't use any astro mode camera.
Okay, then we have Adrian Hendroff. Is there any upper limit to focal length for the light tracker? For example, 35 millimeters or more?
This is a bit difficult because as we discussed now, there are different light tracker models. So with some light tracker models, and it depends on setup. Some light tracker models have like a scope. You can pour a line using the scope, and others have a laser. This depends a lot, not only in the payload capacity, but also in the way that you are doing the alignment. So with some light trackers, for example, you're using a laser, the focal length and the exposure is going to be more limited. There are some light trackers that allow you to use like an EQ wedge and some gear to do like a more refined pore alignment. And in those cases, you can jump into longer focal lengths like 50, 85, 135. But if you use a light tracker with a laser and a simple setup, usually the limit is 24, 35, something around that.
Okay, I think we can continue. There are more questions, but they are about more shooting than gear.
Yeah, we'll cover the shooting later if you like. So talking about some of the models here, first of all, I have to mention that there are a ton of tracker models in the market. There are a lot of tracker models with different specs, with different functions. So I can cover all of them. I'm going to talk about all of those that I have because I own them and I know very well, or because I have the chance to test them in the field. So here are the main, and also these are the most popular in the market. So these three trackers, for example, probably one of the most popular light trackers is the Milky Move Rotator. It's the one that you can see here on the left in the screen. This is a super simple and light portable tracker that is very easy to use, very cheap, and it's great. Another one is the Skywatcher Mini. This is from a Skywatcher. It's a mini version, but for this you have to use a scope to do the pore alignment. And there is something I don't like about this tracker, and is that you have to use the Wi-Fi. So this tracker has no buttons, and you have to use the Wi-Fi with your smartphone to use the tracker. You can do it in the field, there's no problem. But if you run out of battery in your phone or you have any other problem, then you can use this tracker. So that's something I don't like. And lastly, we have the Ioptron Sky Tracker, which also has, as you can see here, like a laser to do the pore alignment, but it's a bit bulkier and a bit heavier than the Milky Move. And also they have this equatorial wedge that we'll discuss later. This is to do the pore alignment and to align your tracker with the celestial pole. And as you start adding more things into this kind of trackers, it becomes bulkier, heavier, pricier. And at some point, I think it's better to have like a standard tracker. In the Milky Move, for example, you can also attach any scope, wedge, more accessories, but it's going to become more like a standard tracker, and with the limitations to the payload. So I don't recommend that. Also, if you are thinking about using the Milky Move, we have a 5% discount using the code CTA. That's something that we requested for the people following our Milky Way course. So if now or in the future, at any point you want to take anything from Milky Move, use the code CTA and you can get that 5% off. Talking now about the standard trackers. Again, there are also many models in the market, but the two main camera tracker models are the Skywatcher Star Adventurer Pro and the Ioptron Sky Guider Pro. Those are the two main models. I have these two trackers. I've been using this for a long time, and I know all the pros and cons of these trackers. They are very good trackers, but there are definitely some pros and cons on both of them. So for example, in the Skywatcher that you can see on the left, this tracker is a really great tracker. It's very sturdy, very reliable, but there are a couple of things I don't like. So first of all, there is no switch on and on button. There's the button to turn the tracker on and off is like a wheel, like a dial that you have to tune. And the problem with this is that sometimes this dial can be turned on like automatically, without, accidentally when you are traveling with your tracker in your bag. And that happened to me once. I was hiking in the Adirondacks in New York. It was a very long trip. And when I was about to start tracking, I saw that the tracker was on for a long time and the battery was dying. So that's something I don't like about this tracker. And the second thing is that the scope illuminator. So basically all these standard trackers have like a scope. So it's basically at the back of the tracker here. And when you peer through the scope, you will see like a clock, and you'll use that to do your pro alignment. We'll see that later. But just bear in mind that there's like a clock. The problem with this tracker is that that scope is not illuminated. And if you want to illuminate the scope to see what's inside at night, you need to use like a scope illuminator. So it's this cheap piece of plastic that you have to use, which is terrible. It's as I said, it's like a very cheap piece of plastic. It's very flimsy. I already broke it, and most people lose it. So most of the people end up using like a headlamp flashing at the scope, and that's one of the cons of this tracker. Apart from that, the equatorial wedge is great. The declination bracket for attaching your camera is great, and it's a great tracker. On the other hand, we have the Ioptron, which has basically the same functionality. So it's the same payload capacity. It's a bit lighter and a bit more compact, which is something I love because it's really noticeable that it's lighter compared to the Skywatcher. And there are two things that I really like about this tracker. The first of all is that there is a switch on and off button. It's something very simple that you avoid that problem of accidentally turning on the tracker. And the second, and this is very convenient when you're in the field, is that the scope is illuminated. So as long as you turn on the scope, you will see that the scope turns on red and everything is fine. You don't have to use any piece of plastic attached to the tracker. And as I said, that's very convenient when you're in the field at night and you have to look for other pieces. So that's why lately I've been liking mostly the Ioptron and using more the Ioptron over the Skywatcher, but both are great trackers. The only cons about the Ioptron that I don't like is the EQ wedge, the equatorial wedge, which is this one here. And it's very small. It's not really, I don't know, I don't really like it. I think it's not very good quality. And especially it's very small. When you are trying to tweak the buttons with your fingers, there's not enough space. And it's a bit tricky to do it. So that's something to consider as well with this tracker model. As I said, there are more models in the market. There are like Vixen Polari. There are many different models, but I'm just talking about probably the most popular and the ones I know. And of course, in the end, my final recommendation is that you should use the tracker that best suits your photography style and your goals. You have to think, what type of gear do you have? What type of photography you want to do? Which are your goals? And decide which is the best tracking for you. So one example here on the right side, you can see this was taken. I took this like a couple of months ago in Bryce Canyon. This was in Sunset Point. This is like a viewpoint very close to the car. So I was using my two trackers, two setups. And on the right side, for example, we have the Shoot Move with the Sony 20 millimeters. And I was taking like a standard wide angle picture of the Milky Way or the galactic curve. And on the left side, we can see the Skywatcher with the Sony 35. And I was doing a track panorama. So in those cases, for example, when I have like enough space and the car is close to the tracking point, I can use both trackers and do different things. If I'm, for example, hiking, I like hiking a lot, going to the mountains and doing very long hikes. I use the Shoot Move, for example, because it's a lighter tracker. If I want to capture like a very complex and more quality and a track panorama, mosaics, I use the Skywatcher or the Ioptron, one of those two. So it depends on the situation, on what I want to get. Another thing I do, for example, I mix. So one thing I found is that, as I said before, I don't like the equatorial wedge in the Ioptron. So what I do is I use the Skywatcher base with the Ioptron on the top. And I found that this setup works really great. Of course, I'm not saying that you have to do this because you have to buy two trackers. but it's something that works really great for me. And the thing with this is that you have to value what you want to achieve, which are your goals, and which can be the best tracking for you. And that's the thing. So that's basically it. And we're going to move now into the pro alignment. If there are any other questions about gear, we can cover that right now if you like.
Yeah, there are a lot of gear to choose from here. We have Amon Cullen. I use a SkyGuider Pro with Nikon D800 and a Sigma R40mm f1.8 lens. Does this rig need a declination bracket, or is the SkyGuider Pro motor strong enough?
Well, it depends. If you're using a Nikon D800, I have that camera. It's my older camera, and the Sigma 1424 is a heavier lens. I would recommend, if you can, using the declination bracket. The declination bracket is just simply this bracket here. The normal attachment for the tracker is this. So on both trackers are basically the same. You'll have like a standard attachment here and a declination bracket, as you can see. With heavier lenses and heavier setups, I recommend using the declination bracket. And if you are not doing like a long hike, you can attach the counterweight. That's to have more stability and a better balance in your tracker. And yeah, if you're using that setup, I highly recommend to get the declination bracket.
Okay, and then we have FedMe and Papa Alpha, who are telling us that dithering is randomly moving the pointing to remove the walking noise when stacking the subs.
Good to know.
Dithering is shifting the image a couple of pixels to isolate. Thank you for the tips, guys.
Yeah, thanks for the tips.
Awesome. So let's move on.
Yeah. Yep. So moving on, I'm going to show you first a few examples so you can have like some reference. I took this Milky Way track panorama using the Skywatcher Star Venture Pro. The sky is actually taken with a wide-angle lens. It was at 20 millimeters. I think it was 4 or 5 shots taken horizontally, but the exposures are very long. I think each exposure is around 4 minutes, and that allowed me to extract all the details of the data. This other example is this was taken with the Ioptron SkyGuider Pro, and this is a bit more complex, this track panorama, because it was taken at 35 millimeters. I think in total it was more than 35, 40 images. I'm going to show you later in the post-processing everything step by step with this image. So you're going to see all the layers in Photoshop, how I built this image, and you're going to see how I took the different shots, but this was taken with an Ioptron, a standard tracker. Lastly, we had this image taken with a move and 20 millimeters, just like a simple wide-angle lens, nothing complex, nothing difficult. It's just, like a normal wide-angle shot. And we're going to move around into the stat tracker setup. I'm going to show you the different steps that you have to follow depending on your tracker, because light trackers and standard trackers can have like different kind of setups. So we're going to see some things are in common and other things depends on the tracker. So we're going to see everything right now. So first of all, the first step, and this doesn't matter your camera, it doesn't matter your tracker model, it doesn't matter anything. You have to level your tripod. This is key and fundamental. If your tripod is not level, when you are tracking, maybe your first image is going to be fine, your second image probably is fine, but after a few shots, you're going to see that your stars are going to be like trails. So whenever you can, level your tripod and make sure that it's completely level. For this, you can use any bubble level, either physical bubble level, or maybe with your smartphone, you can use an app, and just make sure that it's level. Second step, you have to mount either your ball head or your equatorial wedge. In some light trackers, for example, like the Move or the like in the Skywatcher Mini and this kind of trackers, is like a simple setup. Same as when you mount your camera, just place your ball head on top of your tripod. If you are using a standard tracker and you want to capture longer exposures, longer focal lengths, for doing the pro alignment that we'll not discuss later, you have to fine-tune your latitude and your position. So for this, we are using this equatorial wedge. It's also called altitude azimuth base. And using this base, as you see, there's like a knob here on the front, and there are some numbers. You have to dial the knob until you find your latitude. To find your latitude, you can use PhotoPills. So whenever you are in the planning, just grab the pin to your location, tap on the pen, and you will find your latitude. So using PhotoPills, in a second, you can find your latitude. You can, set your latitude in your knob, and that's it. You don't have to do anything else at this point. Third, you have to slide the tracker either over the ball head or the equatorial wedge. This again is very simple. Just take your tracker and slide either in the ball head or in the equatorial wedge. So this is again a very simple step. Fourth, we have to mount either a ball head or a VC bracket on the tracker. Here we can also mount the declination bracket that we were discussing before, but whatever you want to mount to attach your camera to your tracker. In simple trackers for normal simple images, like a wide angle shot, you can attach like a ball head, like you can see on the left with the shoot move. For tracking, for example, track panoramas and doing mosaics and other things, I prefer using these Z brackets. These are very popular right now, and you can use them with any kind of tracker. I highly recommend the ones from Shoot Move that were designed by Alan Wallace, and they are really great Z brackets. You don't really need a Shoot Move. You can use them with any tracker. So any, with a Sky Guider, with a Sky Watcher, whatever, you can use them. So I highly recommend that for taking more complex images, you can use these Z brackets. And also, you're using like a heavier setup, you can use the declination bracket and the counterweight, whatever you need. After this step, the next step is to attach a camera, and as you can see in the brackets, ready to shoot. So right now we can attach your camera either to the ball head, to the Z bracket, or to the declination bracket, whatever you're using. I'm marking here ready to shoot because as you can see in the image, the intervalometer is already set up here in the camera. And I'm saying this because ideally you should have all your camera set up when you are attaching your camera. And this is very important before doing the pro alignment. We're going to discuss later on why you should do this, but bear in mind that you should mount your camera equipped with everything. If you're using like a lens warmer, if you're using a power bank, if you're using whatever, make sure that it's attached at this point. Now, the critical and most important step. You have to align the tracker with the north or south celestial pole, depending on your hemisphere. So basically, this depends on the tracker model, and it changes a lot. So for example, if you're using a light tracker, as we said, Motion Move, Iotron Sky Tracker, any of these trackers, you can align using the laser. If you're in the northern hemisphere, we are, like I am, for example, we are a bit luckier because it's easier. So we have Polaris, which is very easy to see in the sky. And using Polaris, you can easily find the north or the south, find the north and doing your pro alignment. If you're in the south, you can use the octants. It's a bit more difficult, but there are some references to find where is the south celestial pole. In any case, using a laser is great, and as long as you can use a laser and it's not banned in your country, because I know that in some countries like Australia, Switzerland, lasers are banned. So as long as you can use a laser, this is great and it's very easy to use. The other way to do the pro alignment is using with a standard tracker. As you see here, if you peer through the scope, you're going to see a clock like this. The clock changes depending on the tracker model. This is, for example, the clock in the Ioptron. And what you have to do is simply check in your smartphone using an app where is the Polaris star, and then just place the star in the same location in your tracker. So using the azimuth screws, are these two screws here, you can move the star sideways from left to right and right to left. And using the altitude knob, you can move your tracker up and down. So you just place the star in the right position and you are good to go. Pro alignment, as I said, is the most complex and the most critical step when you're using a star tracker. This we could take like an entire master class just about pro alignment. We don't have time for that today, but anyway, this is something critical. Just bear in mind that it's going to be essential and it's going to be the key for taking longer exposures. I'm going to give you later on a few tips on pro alignment, but bear in mind that this is the most critical step. The next step is just turn on your tracker, adjust your camera settings, and shoot. You can also, if you can, I recommend adjusting actually your camera settings even before aligning, because sometimes when you are touching the camera, you can miss the pro alignment. This is something that I didn't mention, and it's again very crucial. Once you have your camera and your tracker, once your tracker is aligned, you shouldn't move anything. You shouldn't move your tracker, and you shouldn't move your tripod legs. If you move anything, it's very likely that you're going to throw off your pro alignment and you're going to find star trails in your images. So be very careful with kicking the tripod legs. Be very careful moving your tracker. And that's why everything should set up already in the camera. And ideally, you can use, those settings even before tracking, and just use the camera very light so you don't move anything. And the last step, of course, and don't forget this because this is one of the most frequent errors when tracking, check that you capture pinpoint stars. And this is not only for the first image. So obviously you're gonna check your first images, you're gonna zoom in your LCD screen, and you're gonna see if you have pinpoint stars or what you have. Don't be confident that it's gonna be like this throughout the session, because sometimes, the camera is moving, the tripod is moving, maybe your pro alignment is not 100% accurate, and maybe your first image is fine, but after maybe 5-10 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour, your stars are like trails again. So always, this is something I always recommend 100%. Zoom in your images. It takes like 2 seconds. Check that you have pinpoint stars, and after that, you can just keep tracking. So you'll be good to go. Those are the basic steps. As I said, this can be taken more in depth, of course, but roughly this is the way to use your tracker.
Cool. Dan, we have a few questions before we go into the polar alignment tips. We have Rob B. How do you deal with tracker tilt as you are doing multi-panel? Repositioning the tracker or camera? Yeah,
that's a very good question. That's what I mentioned, the Z brackets. If you're using a ball head and you want to capture maybe a track panorama or a mosaic with different images, it's going to be very, very difficult with a ball head. It's going to be a pain, actually, because whenever your tracking is going to be moving, and then when you try to readjust, your ball head is gonna block. So that blockage is gonna be a real pain when you are trying to get these images. That's why there are different setups for doing track panoramas and track mosaics. Using Z brackets is a good way, because the Z brackets have like a knob that you can tweak, and you can reposition your camera. Also, in the standard trackers, there's like a clutch to adjust your tracker, and you can just lose your clutch and readjust the tracker. So there are 2 different ways to do it. But yes, track panoramas, as I said, is one of the most complex things to do, and it takes a lot of knowledge and practice. But yeah, it's definitely worth it once you get the image.
Yeah. Talking about panoramas, Judy Jacqueline was asking before, you have any tips for shooting a panel with a tracker?
Yeah, those are basically the most important things when doing track panoramas. Also, make sure that you are capturing, for any panorama, enough space, not only in the edges but also in the top and the bottom. Make sure that you are capturing enough space, and also you are capturing very long exposures. Be very careful where you start shooting. For example, if you start shooting from the tail of the Milky Way in the northern hemisphere, by the time you are getting to the core and then you're getting back, probably the Milky Way is moving a lot. So what I recommend is moving always from the point where the Milky Way is going to. And this is especially critical if you are shooting multi-row panoramas. So if there are multiple rows of panoramas, that's something that you have to consider, and I always recommend doing. So start shooting from the place where the Milky Way is going to. So for example, in northern hemisphere, the core is moving now from the south, well, at this time of year, southeast to south, and then south to southwest. So start shooting from maybe the southwest, and then to the south and to the southeast. And that way you won't be chasing the Milky Way. That's one of the best tips I can give.
Cool. Then we have Jerry Hoffner. What do you think about the wedge from MSM?
Well, I haven't tried that wedge yet. And the reason for this is that, to me, it doesn't make sense to use a wedge, a scope, with a light tracker like the Mushu Move. If I want, for example, the Mushu Move for me is just when I want to hike, to do like a long trips, and I don't want to carry a lot of weight, or if I want to do something very simple, very quick, something like that. If I'm doing something more technical, I use the Skywatcher or the Ioptron, as I showed before. I know some people using the Mushu Move equatorial wedge and the scope, and they manage to get longer exposures, longer focal lengths. But one of the problems is that it's going to be more expensive. So these accessories, if you take the tracker with these accessories, the price is going to be the same compared to a standard tracker, if that makes sense. And that's one of the things that, and the other thing is, for example, if you're in a place like Australia where lasers are banned, that makes sense probably using like one of these accessories with the Mushu Move. But to me, it doesn't make sense. So because I have the 2 trackers and I can combine both of them. But if you feel that you want to have the lightest possible tracker and like a bit of a better polar alignment, you can use these accessories.
Great. We have another question from Rui Baptista. What are the advantages and cons of trackers versus taking multiple shots and stacking them?
Yeah, that's also very frequent questions. Which is the difference? Why not just stacking? Maybe you can stack 20 images for 30 seconds and exposure time is going to be the same. Well, the reason for this is that when you're stacking images, the settings are going to be very different. So as we said before, in a 15-second exposure, 20-second exposure, you don't have time to capture enough light. Then the other thing is that you're gonna use a high ISO in every image. So when you use a high ISO, you're gonna lose the dynamic range. So even if you take 10, 15 images and just stand together, the result is not going to be the same as tracking. I'm not saying that you shouldn't stack images. For example, if there are windy conditions that sometimes you can find, especially in mountains areas and things like that, you'll find that there's some wind. And in those situations, you have to stack because there's no way that you can take an image for 3 minutes, 4 minutes with no movement. So in those situations, yes, I stack, but bear in mind that there's a huge difference between stacking and tracking.
Okay, thank you. And the last one before we move on, Fred Eric, do you think mirror lockup is worth to avoid vibrations?
You can do it. I mean, that applies the same as for shooting from a fixed tripod. So if you have a DSLR camera, yeah, you can do it. That doesn't change anything between shooting from a fixed tripod or shooting with a tracker. There is no difference.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Let's go for those tips.
Yeah, let's move ahead. So as I said, we cannot get into polar alignment because that would take like an entire masterclass, but I'm going to give you a few tips. First of all, of course, learn to find Polaris or dioctans. You need to know how to find these stars in the sky. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to align your tracker and to track. This can maybe seem very complex if you've never done this before, but it's very simple. And nowadays, using different apps, different things, it's very easy to find Polaris and dioctans. Polaris, as I said, is very simple. Using the bit deeper as a reference, you cross a straight line and you will find Polaris. It's super simple, but bear in mind that you have to know how to find these two stars.
And you can always use the night AR or PhotoPills.
Yeah, actually, I was about to mention that before, as you can see here, because there's one way to use PhotoPills. I'm going to mention that right now. Next, you can mount and prepare all your camera gear before doing the polar alignment. This is something we discussed before as well. So it's very easy that when you mount, you align your tracker, you mount your camera, and you start tweaking settings, doing different things, there's a chance that you can throw off your polar alignment. That's why when you are doing your, the focusing your camera, doing the first maybe test shot, something like this, you can do it before doing the polar alignment. Once you polar align, ideally you should have your camera completely fully set up on top of the tracker, and that way you can start tracking. Another tip, if using a laser, again, if lasers are allowed, just remember that in some countries, lasers are banned, and in some areas, especially close to airports and things like that, lasers are banned. But if you can use a laser, that's going to be very convenient. Because one of the main issues when you are polar alignment is either you're looking through the scope, and maybe there are no stars, or the second, and this is a bit more difficult, is that you are peering through the scope and there's like a bunch of stars and you're not sure which is Polaris. For example, when you see Polaris with the naked eye, it's very easy because it's like a very bright star in the sky. But when you see Polaris through the scope, all the stars kind of have like a similar luminosity. So it's a bit difficult sometimes to identify which is Polaris, especially if you're starting out. So using a laser, you can, for example, take your tripod legs, attach, use the laser and just turn on the laser. And when you pierce through the scope, you can see which is your star. If you are with someone, it's going to be easier. Someone can hold the laser for you and point out Polaris. But using a laser is a very good tip. Another good tip is checking your pro alignment during the session. As we said before, make sure not only your pinpoint stars, but also your pro alignment. Especially if you're using a standard tracker, you can pierce through the scope, or using the motion move with the laser, you can just turn on the laser to see if everything is fine. But make sure multiple times during the session that your pro alignment is correct, because sometimes it's going to move if you are kicking the tripod legs, if you are moving your camera, or maybe your pro alignment is not 100% accurate and it's going to be moving. Another one, and this is another frequent questions, if you cannot see Polaris because either the northern star or the octans are blocked by any mountains, I don't know, you're shooting from a cave, if there are some clouds, how can you pro align? Well, you can actually do it. There are different techniques to do it, but this will be like a rough pro alignment. So there are some limitations. Your shutter speed is going to be lower. The focal length, I would recommend using a wide angle. And for this, as you can see here, you can use PhotoPills. And PhotoPills is great for this. You can use the, as Rafa said, the augmented reality mode. You can place your smartphone, perpendicular to the tracker and just, do like a rough pro alignment to see where is the north and where is the south. That's better than nothing. Of course, it's not going to be as accurate as doing like a normal pro alignment, but it's going to work, and you'll be able, I managed to capture maybe up to 2-3 minute exposures doing this kind of rough pro alignment. So you can do it. And my last step, and last but not least, is be patient and practice. Pro alignment can be very frustrating at first, especially when you're starting. So make sure that you practice. And for this, you don't have to go to shoot the Milky Way. You can actually practice wherever you are, even if you're in the city. Polaris is very easy to see, even in light polluted areas. So, do your pro alignment and then just practice, run some test shots. And that way, when you're shooting the Milky Way in the field, there will be no issues. So,
thanks for the tips.
Yeah. We're going to move now into something very crucial, and these are the track camera settings. So, for track camera settings, as we said at the beginning, the camera settings when you're tracking are going to be completely different to shooting from a fixed tripod. They have nothing to do. They change completely. So the track camera settings, again, this could take like an entire masterclass because they depend a lot on your tracker, on your camera, on your focal length, on your goals, on the conditions, on many things, okay? So I cannot say, use this, use that. It's just impossible. I'm going to give just like a general reference that you can take, like a rule of thumb, using a full frame camera and a wide angle. Take this just as a reference. So the aperture, if possible, and especially if you're using like a prime fast lens, you should close your aperture 1-2 stops from the maximum aperture. So for example, if you're using the 20 millimeters 1.8 or the 24 1.4, just close 2 stops. Just a couple of stops is going to be fine, and you're going to eliminate all the coma and all the aberrations in the corners. For the ISO, you have to find the sweet spot between the noise and the dynamic range. This sounds a bit complex, but for example, if you are using a tracker, that doesn't mean that you have to use your native ISO. You don't have to use ISO 100, ISO 200, because actually, and this may sound a bit counterintuitive, if you're using a lower ISO, you're going to find more noise in your images. That's because you're shooting at night, there's no light hitting the sensor, and if you're looking into this kind of freak sensor charts, you will find that in most cameras, the higher the ISO, the less noise you will find, up to some point, of course. The thing with the sweet spot is that you have to find where is the sweet spot of your dynamic range. As we said before, most cameras have a better dynamic range the lower ISO that you use. So using a lower ISO, you will have more colors and more dynamic range in your Milky Way images. And don't forget this, Milky Way images is a high dynamic range type of shooting. There are some areas, some nebulas in the Milky Way, like the Lagoon Nebula, that are going to be blown out very easily. And there are also very dark areas. So it's a high dynamic range. So usually this sweet spot depends on your camera. In my camera, the Sony a7R4, for example, my ISO usually ranges between 640 and 3200. So usually around that. But my recommendation is to check you need to know your camera sensor, how your camera sensor performs, and then find which is the best ISO. And lastly, and this is a question that Rafa was asking before, is that how should be the shutter speed? As I said, I usually shoot 1 to 4 minutes depending on the conditions. If there are windy conditions, I lower my shutter speed maybe to 1 minute, and if I lower my shutter speed to 1 minute, I can stack several images, like maybe 4 or 5 images. And if there are nice conditions with no wind and everything is perfect, I can track 3 or 4 minutes. But be very careful, and I'm writing that down here, don't overexpose. is another common error. When you are tracking, you are very happy taking your super long exposures for 4 or 5 minutes, and you think that you're having the best possible images, but then when you zoom in the Milky Way, there are some areas that can be blown out, as we said before, especially some nebula, some stars that are very bright can be blown out. So be very careful and don't overexpose your images. As I said, this can take like an entire masterclass, but this is like just a general reference so you can know the track camera settings.
Dan, I think your camera just turned off.
Yeah.
You disappeared.
Yeah, one second.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, 1 second, Rafa.
Don't worry. Be happy. Dun, dun, dun. We have a question from Adrian Hendro.
I think I'm back.
yeah, you're back.
Sorry about that.
We have no worries at all. These live things are super cool. We have a question from Adrian Hendro. Do you close 1 or 2 stops from maximum aperture even with a f4 lens?
Yeah, that's the thing. If you're using maybe f4, I wouldn't. Oh, sorry about this again. Yeah, if you're using, for example, an f4 lens, I wouldn't recommend closing too much because your aperture is not very wide open already. So I usually recommend closing maybe 1 to 2 stops if you have anything around 2.8 or below. That's what I said, that this depends a lot on the conditions, your lens, and any other things. But yeah, basically, if you're using a f4, you can maybe close 1 stop or maybe half stop, but be very careful because your lens is not very fast. And yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you're ready to move forward, we're going to see a bit of the post-processing, which again...
Dan, before we go into the post-processing, do you mind answering a few questions on shooting?
Oh, sure, yeah, of course.
Yuri Jakvik, related to my first question, do you take a single exposure when tracking, or you also take multiple exposures and stack them?
Yeah, as I said before, if I'm taking a relatively good exposure, like maybe 3-4 minutes, and that's fine for me, I don't do any stacking. I just take 1 shot because I think that 1 shot is enough to capture everything that you need. Again, this is very different if you are doing deep sky. If you are shooting with a longer telephoto lens and capturing more details, you'll have to capture a lot of images and then stack them together. But for wide-angle Milky Way, I think that there's not like a substantial difference to do this. The only situation where I stack track images is when I'm shooting in windy conditions, for example, or if there is another reason. If I cannot track longer than 1 minute, I just stack maybe any from 5 to 10 images, and that's the only situation where I do this kind of stacking.
Okay, thank you. Then we have Ahmed Wada. Do you focus shift your foreground images? If so, then how many images you take and how do you focus?
Yeah, for the focus, that's a great question because as you guess, when you're tracking, the sky is going to be perfectly sharp if you do a right setup, but your foreground is going to be blurry. I'm going to show you a few examples right now in the post-processing. So what you can do, and what I usually do, is I focus on the stars, focusing at infinity when I'm shooting and tracking the Milky Way. And when I'm taking my foreground shots, I usually take either the hyperfocal distance and the hyperfocal focus that you can find, using PhotoPills or any other thing. Or just, if I'm shooting very close with something very close to the foreground, I'm using, I don't know if there's a problem with the camera. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on with the camera today. I think it's getting... Yeah, I'm going to try again. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. You're doing great. Yeah. Great class.
Let's see if there's no issue now, probably.
You're back.
So yeah, what was the question? Sorry, I lost the thread. It was
it was about focusing. And,
sorry, focusing. Yeah, if there is a focus stack, if there's something very close to the foreground, I do like a focus stacking. and I focus in different sections, just like a normal landscape shot. Sometimes I do like blue hour blends. I'll show you like an example later where I can. There's something wrong with the camera. Sorry about that. I don't know. I'm gonna turn it off. I'm gonna turn it off for a few minutes because I think there is something with the heating or something like that. But
okay, no worries.
I will switch it on and try later. And
awesome.
Yeah. So basically, when you're focusing, if you are doing a blue hour blend, like I said, you can focus on the foreground first and then focus on the sky separately. It doesn't matter.
Great.
Is there any other question, Rafa? Or
yeah. Fred, Eric, one should not overexpose, but what's about exposing to the right when you're in the Milky Way?
Yeah, that's another good question. Something to check if your track images are correctly exposed is checking the histogram. And this, again, is different. The histogram in a track image is different from the histogram in a normal shot. So histogram in track images, what I noticed, if you want to have everything fine, is usually on the left of the midtones. So if you take the midtones, it's going to be around the left. Usually in normal Milky Way images from a fixed tripod is more towards the blacks, more tilted towards the left. But in track images, in my experience, always make sure that your histogram, the peak of your histogram, all the data, all the information is in the left of the midtones, between the shadows and the left of the midtones.
Cool. Then we have Rui Baptista. I've heard about filters such as the pyronite of Ian Norman, one we expect, to reduce light pollution in areas where light is excessive. What is your opinion on using these kind of filters?
Yeah, I haven't used Ian's filter. I know that there are some other filters right now in the market for doing this kind of focusing. What I found is that for wide angle, you don't really need them. I mean, they can help in some situations, but you don't really need them in all situations. So for example, if you are using a longer focal length, like 100 millimeters or 400 millimeters, these kind of filters or Batinov mask, sometimes they are called Batinov mask, is the original filter, I think. You can use them to fine-tune your focus, and they're going to help a lot. If you're using a wide angle, they are not as effective. But if you have problems focusing, they can help you out. When I use in my camera, I have the focus peaking. And that's what I found the most useful thing. My focus peaking is in red. So whenever the stars are fine, the red is blinking. And I make sure that my image is perfectly fine. But I haven't tried the Ian's filter or any other filters. I just tried the Batinov mask with a longer focal length, and it works. I've tested with a wide angle. It doesn't make a huge difference, so I don't use it.
Yeah, in the PhotoPills team, we use the pyronite filter to fight light pollution in the sky. Because here in Menorca, in some areas, we have some light pollution, and it works great, actually. Antonio loves it. So it's a pretty cool piece of gear. You can get one of them. Okay, then we have Ralph's chat. Do you use long exposure noise reduction?
No, that's always off. And I don't recommend turning it on, even if you're shooting without a tracker. Always off, because the thing is that you can reduce the noise taking a long exposure, but if you're exposing a track image for 3 minutes, your camera is going to be 3 minutes off, unable to use. So my recommendation is not using the long exposure noise reduction.
Great, then I think we can continue with the post-processing.
Great, yeah. I'll try to turn on my camera in a few minutes. But let
me know. I just maximized the screen you share with me, so we're here now.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna give you a few tips and show you a little bit more of what steps I follow in my post-processing. As we said, this is another critical step. I know that in some landscape images, maybe you don't need to do like a very intensive post-processing, but when you're shooting astrophotography, it doesn't matter if it's wide field or deep sky, you have to follow, a few steps in post-processing to make the most of your images. So the first and most fundamental is to start with well-captured images. If you don't have good data, if you don't have good raw files, it doesn't matter your post-processing skills, that you won't get like a very good, well-rounded image. So always make sure that you use the right settings, your you have pinpoint stars everywhere, even in the corners, and make sure that you are capturing the most possible images in the field. Another important thing is using a good white balance. So that's another thing. For example, if you're using the wrong white balance, then in post-processing it's going to be more difficult to use to manage to get like the natural colors in the Milky Way. This is especially important if you're using you're tracking panoramas, mosaics, and taking like different images. My white balance, this is, can be a bit personal. If you prefer to have your Milky Way with a specific color, if you want to have a bit more natural colors in your Milky Way images, I would recommend a bit warmer white balance than what is something recommended. I know that sometimes, most of the recommendations are around 3,000 something Kelvin for the white balance. I recommend always 4,000 or above, which is a bit warmer, because then in post-processing, it's going to be easier to extract and to get a better balance in your images. As you know, if you're shooting raw, you can then tweak the white balance in post, but if you're tracking panoramas, things like that, make sure that you use a manual white balance. And yeah, it's a good starting point. The most critical part is the blending. And that's because, as we said before, when you are tracking, your sky image is going to be perfectly sharp, but your ground image is going to be blurry. So you have to do a blending and merge both images. Doing a blending can be a bit daunting sometimes. It can be also a bit complex in some situations, but just believe me, it's not really difficult. Doing like a few simple steps, you can do your blending and, it will be fine. And lastly, apply the right techniques to extract the full potential of the data. Of course, as we say, you have to apply the right techniques to extract all the details, all the colors in the Milky Way, all the air glow, and just everything. So make sure that you're applying the right techniques to extract everything and make sure that this is fine. Right now, we're going to see a few examples. We're going to see two images with the before and after and all the process. So this is going to be the first image was taken at Delicate Arch in Utah. And with this image, first of all, I'm going to show you a few tips for the planning using PhotoPills, which is the app that I always use PhotoPills for doing this kind of shootings. And my goal with this shooting was to align, as you can see here, the Milky Way with the arch. That was the main goal. So what I did is I went to PhotoPills. I set the pin. I started tweaking the pin. So using the pin locator, moving the pin around to some point where I can see that the Milky Way is going to be framed. If you are not very familiar with this, the light gray line is the start of the Milky Way core visibility, and the dark gray line is the set. So if, for example, the arch is here, this is the top of the arch, and I just wanted to put the pin in some place where I can see the Milky Way frame in the arch. The second step is moving into the night. So I just move the timeline to the night and just find the time where the Milky Way is aligned. As you can find here, there's like a straight line. This is the galactic center. And as you see, it's completely vertical, aligning with the arch at 10 o'clock. So I knew that to take this image, I should be at 10 o'clock, roughly in this position. Of course, this is a map. You don't know exactly the spot, but you have to check in the field. So once you're in the field, what I do is using the night AR mode, which is something I really love about PhotoPills because you can it's something I use all the time. I'm a freak. Whenever I go to a place, the first thing I do is take in my smartphone and open PhotoPills to check where is the Milky Way alignment. It's something really freak, but I always do it. And as you can see here, the Milky Way is perfectly aligned with the arch. This was at 9:20. From this position, I remember that I moved a bit to the right, and roughly at 10 o'clock, I could capture this image. So always, I highly recommend to follow these kind of steps when you are planning to make sure that you capture these images. We are talking a lot about tracking. We are talking a lot about post-processing technique, but planning is fundamental in Milky Way photography. Planning is one of the foundations, and every good image starts with the right planning. So here we have the great guys for planning, and that's great.
Definitely. If you guys, if you want to learn how to plan the Milky Way, you can just check our YouTube channel. You'll find a few videos on planning Milky Way photography. So
yeah, make sure that you check all the PhotoPills videos. So talking now about the images for the post-processing. As you can see here, this was my track image. It's a bit tilted, but it's generally fine. As you see, the Milky Way was perfectly aligned We have Jupiter and Saturn here, also the arch, and everything is aligned. I use the shutter speed was 128 seconds, f2.5, and ISO 640. So as you see, very nice settings, nothing extreme, a relatively low ISO. I closed my aperture a couple of stops. It was a 1.8, so it was fine. Then for my foreground, I took my foreground later on. As you see, the Milky Way was moving, and I turned off my tracker. I focused on the arch, and I took an image with 102 seconds, f2, and ISO 800. It's a very low ISO. As you see, it's a bit dark, but my camera is ISO invariant, which means that I can raise the exposure in post-processing, and there's not going to be a big difference in terms of noise. So the next thing I do is taking my image for the foreground and raise the exposure. As you see, everything is fine, and there is no noise. Then the next step, I have to do a blending, and this is the critical step. And the problem when you are tracking, and this is something that you always have to consider, is that, as we said, the foreground is gonna be perfectly sharp here, and the sky is sharp here, but the images are not gonna match. For example, here we are tracking the image for 3 minutes or 2 minutes, wherever, and the arch is gonna be thicker than the arch on the right, than the static arch. So the problem with this is that when you do the alignment in the blending, you're gonna see something like this, like a black shadow from the track shot. This is fixable. I'm gonna show you now how is the result, but bear in mind that if there are some trees and especially branches, especially in the foreground, it's gonna be very, very difficult, very extremely difficult to do the blending, especially just shooting for maybe 3-4 minute exposures. So in all those situations, what I recommend doing, it's if you don't mind, some people maybe say that this is a composite, but you can move maybe 1-2 feet to the right or to the left and track from 1-2 feet, and don't frame the branches in the track image, because that's gonna take you like a very long time in post-processing, and sometimes it's gonna be impossible. So what I do here is fix all the shadows using different techniques to warp, and here, as you see, everything looks fine. But there is a problem here, and this is normal when we're doing a blending. There is a difference in the colors and in the light, especially in the horizon. This is usually the most critical part. And what I do here is I try to create more uniformity in both images. So as you see now, everything looks more uniform. Everything looks more like a single image. And once I have my single image, what I do is just doing my post-processing. So as you see, this will be my base image. And this will be my final image, doing all my, all my classical steps in my post-processing. So this will be the final result. This is a good example, taken with a wide angle, not very difficult. This is a relatively easy shooting. And I'm gonna show you a bit more, something a bit more complex. So we're gonna move into this track panorama that I showed you before. I took this at Alstrom Point in Utah. This is the Lake Powell. It's a lookout in the Lake Powell. And again, going to the planning, the viewpoint is here. There is not much room to shoot around here in this viewpoint. There's like a few spots. So basically it's just trying to find the pen in the place where you can see the Milky Way. My goal here was to capture a Milky Way panorama, framing this kind of, it looks like an island. It's not an island, but this kind of feature in the middle. And I know that this feature is here. So I knew that the galactic core should be on the right side, and then the arch will be on top. So here on the right side, as you can see, I'm using, again, PhotoPills. I'm checking what time I can capture the Milky Way. If the Milky Way is very close to the horizon, then probably it's going to be difficult to capture the image. So my goal was to capture a bit of a higher image here. So for that, what I check is what time, these bubbles, which are the Milky Way, the big bubbles are the galactic center, and which time the bubbles are at a higher angle. As you can see, the elevation of the Milky Way, it was 43 degrees. And I thought that at that time, it was roughly 2:30 a.m. This was last April. At that time, I could capture the Milky Way panorama. And that's what I did. I set up my tracker before, and I started taking my series of images at that time. So this is, again, the AR mode in PhotoPills. This is a bit earlier. It was, as you see, the Milky Way was rising. But if you move the AR mode with the time, you will see that at some point, the Milky Way arches like this in the sky. So moving now into the technical things, I shot the foreground during the blue hour to get more quality in my images. I use a 35mm lens, f1.4. And for the foreground, I took 13 images at 125 seconds, f9, ISO 320. Really easy shooting, really easy panel, nothing difficult here. Now we're moving into the sky, and we come into the tricky thing. I started running some test shots, and I found that there were very windy conditions. The problem with that is that I couldn't shoot with my ideal settings. My ideal settings with a 35 is maybe 2 minutes. I closed the aperture a couple of stops, but it was a little bit windy, so I had to use a shorter shutter speed, like 60 seconds. f1.6, I closed like a third of a stop, and ISO 800. As you see, I took 28 images because this is a multi-row track panorama for the sky. I have to capture different rows. So there are 3 different rows for the sky. And then what I do is simply use the stitching in PDW Pro. If you want to learn how to use this software, I recommend checking one of the last PhotoPills masterclass with Adam Woodworth, which is a great Milky Way photographer, and he showed in that masterclass how to use PDW Pro. So if you want to know how to use that software, check that Adam's and Rafa's PhotoPills webinar. But using stitching in PDW, the foreground is really easy, nothing difficult. And for the sky, we have, it was a bit more difficult. Here you see everything fine. Everything is kind of aligned. It was a bit more tricky because when I was overlapping, there was not enough overlap in some of the images. And there were some seams here that I had to fix. So using the masking tool in PDW Pro and using different functions, advanced functions of PDW, I managed to stitch this huge panorama of the sky. And what I did before jumping into Photoshop is I do the star reduction. This is a technique that I do to extract more details and more colors in the Milky Way. It's just basically, if you've never seen this before, reducing the size of the stars. And if you reduce the size, all the nebulas and all the details of the structure is going to be more evident. So you notice now, the before and after. Here I have my star image, and here my starless image. You can do this in Photoshop with different techniques. You can do this out of Photoshop with different software, but I usually do it out of Photoshop because it gives me more better results. Once we have this ready, it's time to jump into Photoshop. And I actually want to show you the PSD step by step. If it's fine, Rafa, I can.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, actually, give me just 1 second. I'm going to move the PSD, and I'm going to try to switch on my camera again. Just 1 second.
Cool, no worries. Let's see if you can be back. Dun, dun.
Yeah, I think I changed the battery, Rafa. I think it's working now. You can turn on the cameras if you like. I'm back.
Yes, welcome back.
All right, so I'm going to open the PSD here. And this is Photoshop. And I'm going to show you all the layers just to have like a rough idea of how I do my post-processing. I cannot go very in depth because it would take, again, another masterclass, but just like a rough idea. This is my PDW image for the foreground. As you see, there is something, there are some gaps here that I have to fix. So you fix the gaps. And the other thing here is the sky. So here is my sky image. I usually merge my starless image with my star image. This is doing different techniques. I create like a merge with and my final goal is to have an image with some stars, but with some details at the same time. So what I do here is I create a mask to do the blending. So I create a mask, and here both images are aligned. Right now, I try to fix the blending, because when you're blending images, sometimes you'll see, especially in the horizon, in this area, you'll find that there's a big difference in the colors. So with this adjustment, I fixed this kind of bluish image, bluish section. Then once I have this ready, I do like a final transformation. As you see, the horizon is a bit tilted. So I do a small transformation here. As you see, just very simple to straighten the horizon. And this will be my base layer. this I call the base layer because everything I do until this point is basically to prepare my image. So I do the PT with the panorama stitching, I do the star reduction, I do the blending, I do any cloning that I have to do, any destructive adjustment I do until this point. And right now I can start working with the fun. I can start with the fun part, which is working on the Milky Way colors and all that. So for this, I start adding some contrast to the Milky Way and the sky. Then I start working on the structure. Here, as you see, I can start extracting more. And this image actually has more detail. I have to reduce the size because otherwise it will be huge. But if you see this image with the original resolution, you can see like a ton of details more than here. But with this technique, I extract all the structure in the Milky Way. Here I do, I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. I do different techniques to extract more of the structure in the Milky Way, different layers, until I'm happy with the general structure. Once that's fine, I do like an advanced dodge and burn to create more volume in the Milky Way and the sky. So as you see, the before and after, I create more volume. Then I start working, this is one of my favorite steps, I start working with the natural colors. Usually with our wood-white balance, at this point, everything should be fine. So now doing the right techniques, and this is like a series of different layers. So there are many things here, but generally you can just press here. And as you see, the galactic core is gonna start getting those warm colors. The Antares region here is gonna get those colors in the sky. The nebulas, like the Lagoon Nebula, so all that is gonna get those colors. And also the air glow. So as you notice, there is some kind of a greenish air glow here, and that's gonna be also boost doing this. So I do another layer for natural colors, and now I'm just setting the base for my Milky Way shot. Then I do a dodge and burn for the foreground. So I create more volume here, and I also merge a little bit the light pollution coming from the right. So as you see here, we are creating a more uniformity between the foreground and the sky. And this will be my base layer too. So at this point, my base for the sky and the ground is done, and I'm working on the details. So I'm working first on the starlight and colors in the stars. So as you see, we can enhance the colors in some of the stars and some of the areas. Then I work in the H-alpha simulation. This is the thing we discussed at the beginning. If you don't have an astromodic camera, you have to do some post-processing techniques, either to extract the colors or to simulate the colors if you like. This is an optional step, so it's 100% optional. You don't have to do it. But if you like to have like a similar result as an astromodic camera, you can run this kind of simulation. And as you see, all the reds in the Z of Yuki, this star, in Antares, it starts to pop up here. So this is the before and the after. Again, it's very subtle, but you know, the Milky Way gets that kind of more reddish colors. That is the natural color that it has. Then I do, after that, some vignetting to close the frame. I do, I start working on the air glow. So I do different techniques to extract all the air glow here. So as you see now, doing this technique, I extract the air glow and the structure in the air glow, same as here. And this will be my final base image. So at this point, I probably leave the image marinating for maybe a few hours, a few days, whatever. And after this, I start working on my final adjustments. I can see, you know, with fresh eyes, which are the mistakes and the errors. So for example, here in the horizon, there's like a blackened area here that I fixed. And I think that here there was like a trail that I forgot to clone. I think it was around here. I think, well, there were like different things that I had to clone out because I didn't find before. So basically doing some final adjustments. And now I do different layers of final adjustments. So one more here, adding more contrast, more colors, more detail, more structure. So just everything that we have been doing before, more specifically in some areas. I do another layer of final adjustments. Another one for the foreground, you know, and this will be my final layer. So this is the final post-processing shot, and this is basically the workflow that I do. This is, as I said, very rough, very general. This, of course, takes like a lot of mini steps that you have to follow, you know, when you're doing the actual post-processing. But, you know, it's basically what I do. So we're going to jump now.
It's great, Dan, because post processing can it could take one single master class on how to post process the Milky Way. And actually, if you guys want to learn how to post process the Milky Way, we have two master classes in our YouTube channel. One by Adam Woodworth about Milky Way panoramas, and also another one on Milky Way post processing by Nick Page. So there you can go and learn a lot on how to post process the Milky Way in detail. Here, Dan just gave us his workflow and final images.
Yeah, I mean, every person edit images in different ways. At the end of the day, post-processing is something very personal. Some people prefer like a more kind of a minimalistic approach, if you will. Other people prefer to take the images further, whatever you prefer. This is the way I do it. I always, my goal is to have kind of an impressive Milky Way showing all the details, all the colors, and at the same time trying to represent something as natural as possible. That's my end goal, but that's the thing. So cool. I don't know if you have any questions about post-processing, and then I can show you the last things about the presentation. And yeah.
We have a lot of questions, but we can leave them.
Or we can leave them at the end if you like, because a couple of things I want to show in the presentation, and then we can just move into the final questions if you like.
Perfect. So yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to show you, this is just to wrap up this masterclass before the questions. It's a Capture the Milky Way. This is a project I've been working on over the last almost couple of years. It's been a project that is taking me a long time, and it's basically to help others improve their Milky Way photography. So this is basically a Milky Way course that I've developed. I think it's the most complete Milky Way course in the market. It's over 24 hours of content with everything. It's basically everything from the Milky Way tracking to the basics. There are different modules. So there's like a pro tracking module, an advanced module, and a basic module. If you just want to you can get this as a package, as a bundle, or you can get things separately. You're just interested in the pro tracking, or you don't want to track and you just want to get the basics, whatever you like. In the pro tracking is basically everything explained really, really in depth. So we cover the full setup with the different trackers, like the Motion Move, the Sky Watcher, the Sky Guider, how to use the tracker, the buttons, everything. How to do the pro alignment with those trackers and with any tracker with much more in depth. We see everything with all the details. We discuss track panoramas. We give like a few tips for track panoramas, but track panoramas is much more complex. So there's a video, it's almost like an hour talking about track panoramas with examples, with everything. And also track camera settings. So again, here we saw some rough settings, but I discuss which are the limitations, how to find the best ISO in your camera, how to find the best aperture, depending on your camera model, and many things, limitations and everything. And in the post-processing, of course, we see different start-to-finish images. One of these is the image that we saw here. It's the outstrom point. So everything is explained step by step with everything that I do to merge the panorama, to reduce the stars, to merge everything, to do all the adjustments. So everything is there. There are two complete post-processing videos, and then there are different post-processing mini tutorials where you can do advanced star reduction, H-alpha simulation, time blendings, and everything. In the advanced module, we do everything, some advanced techniques like stacking, panoramas, blending, which are fundamental. Don't forget this. Blendings in tracking are critical. Star reduction, and some advanced post-processing, where I include more start-to-finish videos on. One of them is a track image as well. And lastly is the basic module, where we have all the foundations from Milky Way. So Milky Way planning, where we explain how to plan your images using Google Earth, PhotoPills. There's an entire masterclass on PhotoPills as well. Camera gear, camera settings, composition, which is also fundamental, and just the basic post-processing. So even if you don't know how to use Photoshop, I show you how to do it. So everything is there. So basically, if you want to check this out, you can get this as a bundle or maybe as separate modules. This course is pretty new. I launched this a couple of weeks ago, so all the content is super fresh. There are already more than 250 photographers inside, which is great, and people are loving the course. If you want to check it out, the website is academy.capturetheatlas.com. So again, academy.capturetheatlas.com. This is the website. And I wanted to give you a special gift to everyone in this webinar, to all the PhotoPillers. So I created a coupon code. It's a 15% off. So using the coupon code PhotoPills at the checkout, you'll be able to get like a 15% off in any bundle or any package. There are different ways to combine the bundles. So whatever you like. And also there are more things included with the course. So there are unlimited support. There are raw files if you can practice, if you want to practice. There are private community groups. So there are many other things that you can check out. This coupon is going to be valid for 1 week until next Wednesday, so until July 14th. And if you want to check it out, it's there. And yeah, if you want to improve your Milky Way photography, I highly recommend to check it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the gift and the course. I'm sure it's an amazing course, man.
Yeah, I mean, the feedback we received so far is great. There are people who even have finished the course in just 10 days, which is crazy. I don't know how they had the time, but yeah, people are loving the course. The feedback is great. And yeah, I'm very happy to have this kind of product for the community. So yeah.
Congrats.
And another thing we're doing, if you are interested also in post-processing, we are running a Milky Way post-processing challenge. We've been done in the past, and it's basically I upload a couple of raw files and you have to process them according to your taste. You don't need to be an expert in post-processing. It can be like a very basic edit. What we do later on is we create a video, a live stream where we serve the different images, we make comments, and the goal is to improve our images. So we can say, what things are good, what things are worse, and just everything. In this edition, we are giving away a few things. So we are giving away a free start tracker from Motion Move, a leveling base from Sunway Photo, and a free license from our host, from PhotoPills. So cool. If you want to join the challenge, you can join from now until the 25th of July. It's going to be the whole month. And the prizes for anyone. I mean, there's going to be a draw for the prizes. So we are not awarding the best image or something like that. It's just taking part, and you'll have the chance to win any of these things. So just check capturedls.com/challenge. That's the website. And yeah, it'll be fun. I mean, if you want to take part, it's going to be great. I think you're going to learn a lot about post-processing. The image is a track image. So it's also, if you want to start practicing with some track images, it's a track image I took in Death Valley this year. It's a great shot. So they're like, great opportunities for editing. And yeah, I highly encourage to check it out as well.
Sounds fun. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, my pleasure. I don't know if we can check maybe the questions for the post-processing.
Yeah, are you ready for questions?
Yeah, sure.
We have lots of questions on white balance. We have Adrian, Stefano, Shashank. They're asking if you're using an automatic white balance or a specific white balance, and in that case, which white balance are you using when you're shooting the Milky Way?
Yeah, that's a very good question. For the white balance, what I do is it depends on your camera. For example, in my previous Nikon D800, the automatic white balance at night was sometimes off. So it was a bit tricky to set it up, and I always use a manual white balance. With the Sony A7R4, the automatic white balance is great. I noticed that it gets very, very close to the natural colors of the Milky Way. So in Sony A7R4, maybe similar models, you can use the automatic white balance, except when there are some situations like panoramas. Maybe there are different sources of light. So you're talking like a mosaic and there's light pollution, or there are different lights. I'll recommend to get everything in manual. Just set the manual like Kelvin in your camera. But yeah, in general, single images, I use the auto white balance with my camera.
Cool. Thank you. Then we have Mike Fuller. Would the ISO sweet spot be the minimum ISO invariant setting of your own camera? Or at least would give the most flexible raising of exposure in post-processing?
Not really. It depends on the camera. There are different websites where you can check your camera sensor. And if you type your camera sensor, you can see, for example, there's like a graphic where you can see the dynamic range and the noise in your camera sensor model. So it depends on your camera. Usually in most cameras, what I found is that their sweet spot is around ISO 800 to ISO maybe 1600, something like that. Usually the sweet spot is there, but it depends on your camera. Like newer camera models, like for example, the Canon Astro Modified camera, the EOS RA, I think it's called. the sweet spot maybe is higher, or even in the Sony A7S III, which is a great camera for Milky Way and for night photography, that sweet spot might be a bit higher. And that's great because using a higher ISO, with the same dynamic range, you will be able to capture, better images, better exposures, and that's great. So yeah, I highly recommend to do that and check that depending on your camera sensor.
Cool. Thank you. Andrea Wu. What are you using for the star reduction?
Yeah, for the star reduction, there are different ways to do it. You can do it in Photoshop. So there are different filters that you can apply, like dust and scratches, minimum, etc. Those filters usually leave like a few. They can leave like a few artifacts, so kind of strange things in the images, so to speak. So with Photoshop, if you want to do like a very quick and rough star reduction, you can do it in Photoshop. If I'm in a hurry to edit an image, I sometimes do it in Photoshop. But if I have like more time, I usually do it out of Photoshop. Out of Photoshop, there are different specific software. One of these is PixInsight. This is more designed for specifically for deep sky astrophotography, but you can use it for doing this star reduction. You can use it different software, like for example, the StarNet. There are different ways to do it. The important thing is not the software, but how to merge both images. So the integration between the star image and the starless image, that integration is going to be the key. And for doing that, I do that in Photoshop, doing different techniques. It's a bit complex to explain now in a few words because there are different steps. If you're interested, maybe you can check out in the course because I explain that step by step. But yeah, if you want to have the best possible results, I recommend doing the star reduction out of Photoshop.
Cool. Thank you. John Gafford, how do you reposition the camera or tracker when capturing a stack panorama to assure the correct overlap and stitching? Do you adjust your ball head or a Z plate?
Yeah, what I do for this, as I said before, I don't use a ball head. I use a Z brackets. I know that some photographers do track panoramas using like a kind of a nodal base where you can see the angles and be like more accurate. I don't want to carry because, as I said, I love hiking a lot and I like taking my camera bag with all the gear and making more panoramic level bases and all that. It can add like a lot of weight to the bag. So I tested this and using the Z brackets from Move, they are fine for me. There are some situations with wind that they can be a bit wobbly, but those Z brackets are great. With these brackets, what I do usually is take a star as a reference. And using that reference, I can maybe overlap around 30%. If you overlap less than that, you're going to run into issues when you're doing the stitching. If you overlap more, you can run into different issues because maybe you run out of time. The Milky Way is rising in the sky, or maybe in the Southern Hemisphere in Australia or South America is going down, and probably you won't catch the Milky Way. Or you can start the blue hour or any other issues. So always take a reference and make sure that you follow the right steps.
Cool, thank you. Mark K, do you have to realign the rotator when the laser pointer each time you rotate for the panorama?
No, actually, no. I mean, if you do like a good pole alignment, it doesn't matter if it's the laser or if it's the scope. If you do a good pole alignment, you don't have to realign more. So once it's realigned, once it's aligned, it's done. You have to do it again. The only issue is that sometimes if you kick or you move the tripod, which is easy sometimes to do, if you move the tripod legs, if you move your tracker, then probably you have to realign. That's why when you're doing a track panorama, like the Alstrom point that I show you, which is 38 images or something like that, you have to be very careful because if one of the images is wrong and there are trails, then you'll run into issues when you are doing the stitching. So always make sure that you are checking all your images and re-leveling, readjusting, and that's fine. If you see that there are trails, then my recommendation is to quickly realign again, either with the laser or the scope. And the realignment is usually very easy because you are very close to the star, so you just maybe fine-tune a little bit and just be fine-tuned again and realign. So that's something that, but always check your images when you are doing, especially long shootings like panoramas.
Great, thank you. And then we have Herb Fixler. Are you using any panel device when capturing your images for the multi-raw panel?
Yeah, that's what I said before. I don't use any panning device. I just use the Z brackets. I know some photographers that use these panning devices, but they're usually heavier. They take up more space. And I usually try to travel as light as possible, even though you can see all my trackers and tripods. But sometimes I'm doing long hikes and I don't like taking these kind of gigantic setups, which are more accurate, of course, and more stable. But I found that using these motion move Z brackets, they're usually fine for me. So using that brackets is fine. So I know that a lot of people who are using these brackets, and they're usually great. They were designed by Motion Move along with Alan Wallace, which is a great astrophotographer, and they have all the functionalities to operate your tracker with no problem.
Yeah, we all love Alan. Cheers, Alan. You there?
Cheers.
Cheers. Well, David Michaels. What about airplane or satellite trails with long exposures? Can they be handled in post-processing? Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's something. That's also a good question, because sometimes when you're taking maybe like a 3-4 minute exposure, and that happened to me sometimes, there is like a trail that is going across the entire frame. It looks like doing on purpose. It's like, how come there is like a trail coming the entire frame? But yeah, it happens. Sometimes it happens. And what I do is, if it's like too big, I just repeat my image. I take like another shot. If it's like a very short trail, I just do, any cloning, like any normal cloning that you can do in Photoshop. But yeah, if there's like a huge, gigantic trail, what I do is just repeat the image.
Good to know. Good to know. And the last question then, from Askar. How do you do that H-alpha simulation?
Yeah, that's another great question. For doing the H-alpha simulation, and this again, you are getting into the astro mode cameras. With a normal camera, it doesn't mean that you cannot capture the H-alpha colors. You can do it, but to capture them, you'll have to use a longer exposure. That's why tracking is fundamental. And apart from tracking, there are some limitations in normal camera. So this filter is capping the H-alpha simulation, but you can capture maybe like a 10-15% of that range. So what we can do in post-processing is, again, doing different techniques. It's difficult to explain here, but you can do different techniques to boost those colors. So increasing the saturation and using different brushes, you can actually extract those colors in the frame. And if you, at some point, you think that it's not enough for you and you want to have better colors or more colors like in a normal astro mode camera, then you can just do like an H-alpha simulation, and doing the simulation, again, doing some brushes, different adjustments, you can extract all those colors in the sky.
Awesome, Dan. Thanks so much for the presentation today. It's been really amazing. Any last words you want to add?
Yeah, well, I've been very comfortable in this webinar. To me, it's a pleasure to help always. As I said, if you have any questions, not only about Milky Way, about any type of photography, about anything, feel free to reach out. So you can reach out on, on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I also have a YouTube channel with a few Milky Way videos. It's a Capture the Atlas, so that's for everything. We have also like a ton of articles online, tutorials, so everything is there. And if you have any questions about anything that we cover here, either because we didn't reply to your questions, or you are seeing this, watching this as a replay, just reach out to me. You can reach out to me on my email, on my website, capturetheatlas.com, and you can also check out, on maybe my Instagram, at Capture the Atlas. That's fine, and I'll be happy to help. I'm always happy to help others improve their photography, share this passion. And yeah, I'm very honored to be here. So thanks so much, Rafa, and all the PhotoPills team for inviting me today.
No, thank you so much for being here, helping us, and giving us a big push into this amazing world of tracking the Milky Way, which is amazing. So thanks so much. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, guys. And see you in the field. Bye-bye.
Okay, guys. Thanks so much for watching and for being here almost 2 hours on the Milky Way tracking. It's been amazing. As always, if you like this video, give us a like, subscribe, and see you next Wednesday with another video. And before we say goodbye, as always, remember that you have the power to imagine, plan, and shoot legendary photos. Bye-bye. Thank you, Dan.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
See you tomorrow for the Spanish one.